Salatul Qiyam. May Allah reward you. استووا اعتدلوا. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. وآتينا موسى الكتاب وجعلناه هدى لبني إسرائيل ألا تتخذوا من دوني وكيلا ذرية من حملنا مع نوح إنه كان عبدا شكورا. وقضينا إلى بني إسرائيل في الكتاب لتفسدن في الأرض مرتين ولتعلن علوا كبيرا. فإذا جاء وعد أولاهما بعثنا عليكم عبادا لنا أولي بأس شديد فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا. ثم رددنا لكم الكرة عليهم وأمددناكم بأموال وبنين وجعلناكم أكثر نفيرا. إن أحسنتم أحسنتم لأنفسكم وإن أسأتم فلها. فإذا جاء وعد الآخرة ليسوءوا وجوهكم وليدخلوا المسجد كما دخلوه أول مرة وليتبروا ما علوا تتبيرا. عسى ربكم أن يرحمكم وإن عدتم عدنا وجعلنا جهنم للكافرين حصيرا. إن هذا القرآن يهدي للتي هي أقوم ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا كبيرا وأن الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة أعتدنا لهم عذابا أليما. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ويدعو الإنسان بالشر دعاءه بالخير وكان الإنسان عجولا وجعلنا الليل والنهار آيتين فمحونا آية الليل وجعلنا آية النهار مبصرة لتبتغوا فضلا من ربكم ولتعلموا عدد السنين والحساب وكل شيء فصلناه تفصيلا وكل إنسان ألزمناه طائره في عنقه ونخرج له يوم القيامة كتابا يلقاه منشورا اقرأ كتابك كفى بنفسك اليوم عليك حسيبا من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رسولا وإذا أردنا أن نهلك قرية أمرنا متر فيها ففسقوا فيها فحق عليها القول فدمرناها تدميرا وكم أهلكنا من القرون من بعد نوح وكفى بربك بذنوب عباده خبيرا بصيرا من كان يريد العاجلة عجلنا له فيها ما نشاء لمن نريد ثم جعلنا له جهنم يصلاها مذموما مدحورا ومن أراد الآخرة وسعى لها سعيها وهو مؤمن فأولئك كان سعيهم مشكورا كلا نمد هؤلاء وهؤلاء من عطاء ربك وما كان عطاء ربك محظورا انظر كيف فضلنا بعضهم على بعض وللآخرة أكبر درجات وأكبر تفضيلا. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. لا تجعل مع الله إلها آخر فتقعد مذموما مخذولا وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وبالوالدين إحسانا إما يبلغن عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما واخفض لهما جناح الذل من الرحمة وقل رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا ربكم أعلم بما في نفوسكم إن تكونوا صالحين فإنه كان للأوابين غفورا وآت ذا القربى حقه والمسكين وابن السبيل ولا تبذر تبذيرا إن المبذرين كانوا إخوان الشياطين وكان الشيطان لربه كفورا وإما تعرضن عنهم ابتغاء رحمة من ربك ترجوها فقل لهم قولا ميسورا ولا تجعل يدك مغلولة إلى عنقك ولا تبسطها كل البسط فتقعد ملوما محسورا إن ربك يبسط الرزق لمن يشاء ويقدر إنه كان بعباده خبيرا بصيرا ولا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق نحن نرزقهم وإياكم إن قتلهم كان خطأ كبيرا ولا تقربوا الزنا إنه كان فاحشة وساء سبيلا الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق ومن قتل مظلوما فقد جعلنا لوليه سلطانا فلا يسرف في القتل إنه كان منصورا ولا تقربوا مال اليتيم إلا بالتي هي أحسن حتى يبلغ أشده وأوفوا بالعهد إن العهد كان مسؤولا وأوفوا الكيل إذا كلتم وزنوا بالقسطاس المستقيم ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا ولا تقف ما ليس لك به علم إن السمع والبصر والفؤاد كل أولئك كان عنه مسؤولا ولا تمش في الأرض مرحا إنك لن تخرق الأرض ولن تبلغ الجبال طولا كل ذلك كان سيئه عند ربك مكروها ذلك مما أوحى إليك ربك من الحكمة ولا تجعل مع الله إلها آخر فتلقى في جهنم ملوما مدحورا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يوم ندعو كل أناس بإمامهم فمن أوتي كتابه بيمينه فأولئك يقرؤون كتابهم ولا يظلمون فتيلا ومن كان في هذه أعمى فهو في الآخرة أعمى وأضل سبيلا. وإن كادوا ليفتنونك عن الذي أوحينا إليك لتفتري علينا غيره وإذا لاتخذوك خليلا ولولا أن ثبتناك لقد كدت تركن إليهم شيئا قليلا إذا لأذقناك ضعف الحياة وضعف الممات ثم لا تجد لك علينا نصيرا. وإن كادوا ليستفزونك من الأرض ليخرجوك منها وإذا لا يلبثون خلافك إلا قليلا سنة من قد أرسلنا قبلك من رسلنا ولا تجد لسنتنا تحويلا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أقم الصلاة لدلوك الشمس إلى غسق الليل وقرآن الفجر إن قرآن الفجر كان مشهودا ومن الليل فتهجد به نافلة لك عسى أن يبعثك ربك مقاما محمودا وقل رب أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا وننزل من القرآن ما هو شفاء ورحمة للمؤمنين ولا يزيد الظالمين إلا خسارا وإذا أنعمنا على الإنسان أعرض ونأى بجانبه وإذا مسه الشر كان يئوسا قل كل يعمل على شاكلته فربكم أعلم بمن هو أهدى سبيلا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ويسألونك عن الروح قل الروح من أمر ربي وما أوتيتم من العلم إلا قليلا ولئن شئنا لنذهبن بالذي أوحينا إليك ثم لا تجد لك به علينا وكيلا إلا رحمة من ربك إن فضله كان عليك كبيرا. قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثله ولو كان بعضهم لبعض ظهيرا. ولقد صرفنا للناس في هذا القرآن من كل مثل فأبى أكثر الناس إلا كفورا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. وما منع الناس أن يؤمنوا إذ جاءهم الهدى إلا أن قالوا أبعث الله بشرا رسولا. قل لو كان في الأرض ملائكة يمشون مطمئنين لنزلنا عليهم من السماء ملكا رسولا. قل كفى بالله شهيدا بيني وبينكم إنه كان بعباده خبيرا بصيرا. ومن يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد لهم أولياء من دونه ونحشرهم يوم القيامة على وجوههم عميا وبكما وصما مأواهم جهنم كلما خبت زدناهم سعيرا. ذلك جزاؤهم بأنهم كفروا بآياتنا وقالوا أإذا كنا عظاما ورفاتا أإنا لمبعوثون خلقا جديدا. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Rahmanir Rahim. We have skipped saying our witr prayers, which is going to be the pattern from now on till the very end, for the simple reason that these prayers would ideally be said early in the early morning, early part of the morning, sometime before the beginning of the Fajr prayer, at the time when we do our suhoor. So we would encourage everybody to say these rakats at that time, and they need not necessarily be three. Three is the minimum number. It can be 5, 7, 9, 11. This being the 13th night, we are going to do 4 surahs of the third group of surahs, which, as I said, comprises of 15 surahs. 14 of them are Meccans, and they form 7 pairs, and the last one is the Madhan surah. We'll do 4 surahs today, and as usual, I'll pick a few passages from these surahs. The surahs are Ibrahim 14, Hijr 15, Nahl 16, and Bani Israel 17. I begin with the first verse of Surah Ibrahim. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alif Lam Ra. This is Surah Alif Lam Ra. These are the disjointed letters, huruf muqatta'at, which are read separately, and wherever they appear in the beginning of a surah, they are actually the name of the surah. And if we have 2 surahs coming together consecutively and they bear the same beginning letters, it's one indication of the fact that they are in the form of pairs. Kitabun anzalnahu, this is a book that we have revealed, ilayka, O Prophet, to you, litukhrijan nasa min az-zulumati ila an-nur, so that you take people away from the darkness of ignorance towards the light of guidance, bi'izni rabbihim, by the will of their Lord, ila siratil aziz al-hamid, towards the path of the Creator, the mighty, the praiseworthy. This is what the purpose of God's message is. We are all living in a world where we are looking for the truth. We find some part of it, but we don't find a lot of it. And therefore, we are in a state of relative darkness. And the messengers, through their messages, enable us to get out of this darkness towards more and more light, the light of the truth. The second passage that I've picked is verse 22 of Surah Ibrahim, which talks about our one and the only enemy, the open declared enemy, Shaitan. And probably it's one of the most significant verses talking about what is the kind of relationship between us and Satan. The Quran says, وَقَالَ الشَّيْطَانُ لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرِ, and Satan will say when the matter shall be concluded, that is, when on the day of judgment the Almighty would announce the results of all human beings, Satan would say, God promised you a true promise, and I also promised you something, but I broke it. But I didn't have any authority over you except that I invited you and you accepted my invitation. That's what Satan does. Whispers into our hearts evil thoughts, thoughts that we are attracted towards, but we know that they are evil. And that's about it. Satan doesn't push us physically into doing them. So don't blame me, but blame yourself. فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. This is what Satan would say on the day of judgment. Neither can I come to your rescue, nor can you come to my rescue. So that's what the message is that the Almighty has given us now, that if we realize that the world that we are living in, there is an invisible enemy who is all the time making attempts to take us away from the right path towards the wrong one. What we need to do is to be conscious of it and to always repel the efforts of Satan from getting into evil. The third passage is in Surah Ibrahim, the passage that talks about The part of the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam when he was in Mecca, he and his son Ismail alayhi salam, they both erected the house of God, the Kaaba. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he prayed, Rabbana inni askantu min zurriyati biwadin ghayri zi zar. Our Lord, I have settled my progeny in an uncultivated valley near your sacred house, our Lord, that they may establish prayer. That is, the purpose of building this house is that people are connected with you. This is a symbolic representation of your presence. Nobody can see you, nobody can meet you physically in this world, but you have been kind enough to allow us to have a house which we incline towards to have closer contact with you. So after making that prayer, Ibrahim alayhi salam goes on to ask God, so incline the hearts of people towards them and provide for them from fruits and crops so that they may be grateful. Obviously, it was an uncultivated, barren soil. It still is. No cultivation is possible there. So once it was decided that Ismail alayhi salam and his mother Hajra alayhi salam are going to be settled there, it was obviously needed that there should be provisions, risk provided to them, and that is what the Almighty did in response to this prayer that Ibrahim alayhi salam made. This story, although doesn't mention clearly, but it's quite obvious that this was the first time that Ismail alayhi salam, when he was around 15 years of age, that he was asked to settle there, but not at the age when he was an infant, which is a story which is quite common and popular. But this passage of the Quran is pretty much clear that the prayer made by the Almighty, by Ibrahim alayhi salam to the Almighty, was at the time when the house was erected and when the decision was taken that his progeny is going to settle here to ensure that people pray and come close to God and do Hajj and Umrah, etc. Then we move on to the next surah, Surah Hijr, which is a partner of this surah, previous surah, Surah Ibrahim, and therefore, not surprisingly, it also begins with Alif Lam Ra. This is Surah Alif Lam Ra. It has many important messages, but probably the most significant message that we find in this surah is the one which is found in verse 9, wherein the Almighty declares, and declares understandably, for a good reason, that once the decision was taken that the Quran would be the last book of the Almighty and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be the last messenger, last prophet, it was absolutely essential that the message that he brought in the form of the Quran should be completely and fully preserved. Because previously, if there were prophets who came with books, and because the Almighty allows liberty to everybody to do whatever they want to, religious people can also go wrong and they can present in the name of God what is not God's own word. He would not intervene because he knew that he would continue to send messengers, prophets, who would correct the wrong done by the earlier people. But once it was decided that no further prophets are going to come, then this verse had to be revealed, in which this promise has been made, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Indeed, we are the ones who have revealed this remembrance, this reminder, and indeed we are going to ensure that it remains fully preserved. So the Quran is fully preserved because if we need to have the proper, correct understanding of what God's will is, we can always resort to the Book of God, which we know is present in its pristine form, exactly the same way as it was revealed. It's a huge privilege of the Almighty if it is properly understood. Then we move on to, in Surah Hijr, to see verses 49 to 51. The passage mentions that the Almighty has both aspects. He is kind to those who deserve His kindness, and He is firm against those who refuse to improve despite getting ample opportunities. So the passage says that when the angels came to Ibrahim alayhi salam to give him the good news, the Almighty says, Nabbi ibadi anni anal ghafurur rahim. Tell my servants that I am forgiving, merciful. Wa anna azabi huwal azabul alim. And that my punishment is a painful punishment. وَنَبِّئْهُمْ عَنْ ضَيْفِ Ibrahim, and inform them about the guests of Ibrahim. Brought two news, one good and one of punishment. So God is forgiving, but God's punishment is severe. The same angels came to bring the good news of a son to be born to Ibrahim alayhi salam's wife, Sarah alayhi salam. But the same angels also brought the news that the nation of Lut alayhi salam, is going to ultimately be punished to extinction. Verses 87 and 88 of Surah Hijr are talking about a great blessing that the Almighty had given to the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, and he is making him realize that, value this blessing and don't look at the worldly grandeur and whatever possessions these non-believers, disbelievers have. So the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِ وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. And we have given you, actually the idea is we have given you this Quran. So value it, it's a great blessing. But the manner it has been mentioned is that we have given you 7 comprising of pairs, that is the glorious Quran. So while mentioning the blessing that the Quran is, the Almighty described it in words which gave us an understanding of how it has been designed. It has 7 groups, surah groups, each group comprising of surah pairs. So in a very brief expression, the Almighty clarifies that as well and says, that's what the glorious Quran is. Don't even raise your eyes to look at the worldly possessions we have given them, nor grieve at their condition. That's not your concern. Focus your attention on this brilliant presentation, the glorious Quran. However, extend your comforting arms over the believers. Those who have believed, they deserve your attention. Then we move on to Surah An-Nahl, which along with Surah Bani Israel together form a pair. They are a pair in that both are talking about Hijrat. The first one is talking about this migration in brief. The second one is talking in a little more detail. Both surahs are now referring to Jews, Surah Nahl indirectly and Surah Bani Israel directly. Both surahs are alluding to the principles of morality. Surah Nahl is doing it again in brief, and Surah Bani Israel goes in detail. That's one way the Almighty has arranged for surahs to be in pairs. But Surah Nahl is quite apart from its other virtues. It's probably one surah which is brilliant in its description of God's blessings. If you were ever to look at the Almighty's blessings the way He Himself describes, you would do well to read this surah. He says, for instance, وَالْأَنْعَامَ خَلَقَهَا, and He has created grazing animals for you. In them is arrangement for warmth and numerous other benefits, and you eat from their flesh too. And for you is beauty in them when you bring their flocks back in the evening, and when you take them for pasturing in the morning. And they carry your loads to a land where you couldn't have reached yourself except with difficulty. And then it goes on to say, and if you count God's favors, you will not be able to enumerate them. Inna Allah la-ghafurur rahim, and God is forgiving and merciful. That is, despite all these blessings that the Almighty has bestowed upon them, and despite the fact that we continue ignoring them, and we don't thank Him enough as much as He deserves, He forgives us and is merciful. Verse 90 is talking about the most significant statement of the Quran regarding morality. The verse that is the basis of all morals and is read in almost all khutbahs of Jummah. That in itself is an indication of its importance. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i zil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi. I'll be surprised if you have not as yet remembered it, because it's read so many times. And it says, it makes 3 positive mentions of what is morally desirable and 3 other aspects of morally despicable aspects of human inclination. It says, indeed, God enjoins justice and excellence in dealing with others and constant financial support for poor relatives, and He forbids obscenity, evil conduct, and oppression. He exhorts you to righteousness so that you are reminded. Then we move on to a verse which talks about a very important concession that the Almighty has given us. God knows that we are weak, we are ordinary, and therefore He expects from us nothing more than what we can do. So He mentions in verse 106, Man kafara billahi min ba'di imanihi illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutmainnun bil iman. Whoever after having had faith in God disbelieves, except for one who is forced to renounce faith, while faith is firmly placed in his heart. But those who willingly open their hearts to disbelieve, upon them is God's displeasure. That is, if somebody is forced by others to make an apparent announcement of renouncing faith, God is not going to take such people to task. He knows that people are weak. He knows that at times people are pressurized and they have no choice but to give in. So that's not what He is expecting from us. But obviously He would want us to never ever accept disbelief with openness of heart, willingly. There is a clear mention of Sunnah in the Quran. You know, we always say that our religion is based on 2 sources. One is the Quran and the other is the Sunnah of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. What exactly is it? Well, one indication is what we get from this verse 123. It says, ثُمَّ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Then we reveal to you, O Prophet, that follow Abraham's way, who was completely focused and he wasn't amongst the polytheists. Obviously, Ibrahim alayhi salam's way, his religion, wasn't Quran. Quran was revealed to the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. After all, what else was his way? His way was his religious way. Belief in one God, saying prayers, giving zakat, doing hajj, etc. So it started from there, if not before. In actual fact, it started right from the beginning of humanity. But these religious practices, call them rituals, are the ones which all prophets followed. And the prophet, last prophet, may God's mercy be on him, has been urged in this verse to make sure that he too follows what Ibrahim alayhi salam was doing, and that's exactly what our Sunnah is. Verse 125 of Surah An-Nahl is the most significant verse regarding the strategy we Muslims, believers, must adopt when we are inviting others towards faith and the Almighty's message. It says, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. Invite towards the path of your Lord with wisdom, effective instructions, and debate with them in the best possible manner. Indeed, your Lord knows the best those who have strayed from His way, and He knows the best those who deserve to be guided. So in other words, we are expected to be wise, intelligent, polite, while we are talking to others about faith. We have no right to do what many people do while they try to claim that what they're saying is right, and they denounce others, they condemn others, they use strong language, they are harsh in their tone, etc. That's absolutely against what the Almighty expects from us. He says, whenever you invite towards the path of your Lord, and by the way, this is true for the case while you're instructing your kids as well, because they too are being invited towards the path of God. No matter what you're doing while doing dawah, this principle has to be followed. It's not a good recommendation, it's binding. It's binding on us that we be wise while we are inviting towards the path of the Lord. Now I move on to the 4th surah, Surah Bani Israel. The first verse of the surah says, Subhanallazi yasra bi'abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa. The first verse describes the journey of the Prophet may God's mercy be on him, from the holy mosque in Mecca to the mosque in Jerusalem. It says, free from all weaknesses is the one who took his servant in the night from the sacred mosque to the distant one, whose surroundings we made blessed. It's a fertile soil in Palestine, in Jerusalem, where this mosque is based, so that we show him our signs, show the Prophet our sign. Signs of what? Signs of the transfer of the all-important status of God's representatives from the children of Israel to the children of Ismail. So it was a very important occasion. God's decision was actually getting implemented through this experience of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. But verse 60 of this surah clarifies that it was a roya. It was a spiritual experience in the form of a dream, which is in fact more clear and is something that gives not just a vision and understanding of what happens, what was there practically, but it also gives you, or gives the viewer, the one who is experiencing it, the wisdom behind it as well. From verse 4 to verse 9 of Surah Bani Israel, we find that the Almighty is telling us that the children of Israel were communicated clearly that while they are going through this trial of life as a nation, as a group, they are going to go through ups and downs in their history. So it says, we had communicated to Bani Israel of our decision that you will certainly cause mischief on earth and would show haughtiness twice and would as a consequence be punished. While describing this punishment that the children of Israel went through twice in their history, the Almighty mentioned that because they went wrong knowingly, openly, the Almighty caused this punishment to be inflicted upon them through some people. And the Quran says, who were those people? Ibadal lana, our servants, uli basin shadid, who were militarily strong. They weren't pious people, One of them was Titus and the other was Nebuchadnezzar. Both were kings, emperors, but the Almighty is calling them my servants who were given military strength. What I'm trying to say is that if likewise Muslims go through the same experience, it's not because America or Israel or somebody else is strong enough to defy the Almighty's expectations. Nobody can defy God's decisions. It's God who chooses to punish his people, servants, who go wrong blatantly, knowingly, and therefore he allows what he calls Ibad al-Lana, our servants who have military might, and they inflict their punishment on those who claim that they are believers. From verse 22 to verse 39, we have in detail a mention of what we found in brief in Surah An-Nahl in verse 90. Here are the moral norms and expectations mentioned in more detail, which, according to the understanding of many scholars, exegetes, are the 10 commandments of the Quran. And the mention begins by saying, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ. Your Lord, your Rabb has decided that you are not going to worship any entity except him. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and you're going to be good towards your parents, and moves on to mention all those 10 commandments. And then at the end of it, it says, ذَلِكَ مِمَّا أَوْحَى إِلَيْكَ رَبُّكَ مِنَ الْحِكْمَةِ. This is from what we have revealed to you, O Prophet. This is what has been revealed to you, O Prophet, by your Lord in the category of Al-Hikmah. So our religion is divided into two components, Al-Kitab and Al-Hikmah. Al-Hikmah are the moral principles, moral expectations that we all have to follow. All humanity shares them, and also beliefs which are a part of Al-Hikmah. But apart from them, our religion has Al-Kitab, which is Sharia, which is again based on Hikmah, is again based on morality. But that morality, that part of the understanding that the Almighty has given us, we cannot get on our own. So he had to reveal his message for us to get that Sharia. Surah Bani Israel, as I mentioned in the beginning, is also the Surah of Hijr. The mention of Hijr is there in Surah Nahl as well, but here what we find is a much more clear mention of it. In fact, it was revealed at the time when Hijr was around the corner. It says, they are about to drive you from the land to evict you from it, and then they won't remain therein after you have left except for a short while. That's what they are about to do. Why are they not going to stay there but for a short while? The Quran says, Sunnata man qad arsalna qablaka mir rusulina. That is our established policy, our established sunnah that we followed for those messengers too we had sent before you. That is, this is a policy which he always follows. If there are messengers coming to their respective nations and they force the messengers to be driven out of the land, is bound to come to that population. And the Almighty says, Wala tajidu li sunnatina tahwila, and you would never find our policy, our sunnah, to ever get changed. The surah ends with a mention of Qulid Allah avidur Rahman. People, the Meccans, would complain about many things, and one of the things that they would complain about is that, why do you use the expression Ar-Rahman for the Almighty? Why don't you say Allah? There are many Muslims who say that as well. The Almighty says, Qulid Allah avidur Rahman. Call him by his name Allah or call him by his name Rahman. Doesn't matter. Whichever name you call him by, all good names are his. That is, it's more important that you know who are you calling, who are you talking to, because God has many different names and all names belong to him. When we are talking in a certain language to a certain group of people who understand a certain expression for God, it's important, it's better that we use the expression that they know, they understand, instead of insisting that we are using Allah for it, because that's going to create a division, unnecessary division. They would not listen to us because they would think that probably they're talking about somebody else, some other deity. So Muslims have a different God than our God. So the Almighty clarifies it that you call him by the name Allah or you call him by the name Rahman. It makes no difference. No matter what name you call him by, he's got all the good names. And the surah ends by saying, قُلِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ الَّذِي لَمْ يَتَّخِذْ وَلَدًا. All praise and all expressions of thanks are to the one who has not had a son, who has not taken a son. وَلَمْ يَكُلْ لَهُ شَرِيكٌ فِي الْمُلْكِ. And no partner is in his dominion has he taken. وَلَمْ يَكُلْ لَهُ وَلِيٌّ مِّنَ الظُّلْمِ. And he has not taken any protector with him out of weaknesses, out of his weakness. وَكَبِّرْهُ تَكْبِيرًا. And you glorify him befittingly as best as you can. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات.